First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to our second webinar. We had the first one last week. My name is Ralph Biederman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-America chapter of the Chamber. First of all, again, thanks for joining us, and we hope you're all well and staying safe. Our presentations today will be from a great team of professionals from our chapter. And I think we're all going to be in for a good learning experience on what is going on out there, which we're all struggling to figure out. A little bit about the Chamber for those who don't know. We are a binational chamber, with the only one actually between the United States and Mexico, with headquarters in both Washington and Mexico City. The purpose is to build mutually beneficial trade and investment relationships between Mexico and the US. The Chamber was incorporated in 1973 as a 501c6 nonprofit corporation. And today we have 20 chapters, 10 in the US and 10 in Mexico, with a total membership of over 550 companies and organizations. We have numerous groups and task forces, such as the North American Working Group, comprised of members that review and analyze trade issues, and then provide recommendations to appropriate agencies of the government in both of our countries. Since May of 2017, our chapter has held 13 breakfast series sessions with members and friends to openly discuss trade issues and their impact on organizations. Since COVID-19, we have provided many updates on issues to this growing group of concerned individuals in the Chicagoland area. So please check us out at www.usmcocma.org, especially our resources page, where you will find many materials all current on what is going on today. All right, I will begin turning it over to John Milner and Eliel Amaya, both of whom are with Baker Tilly in Mexico City. They're going to talk a little bit about the USMCA, about the economic prospects in Mexico. If you remember, back on March 29th of 2017, the U.S. Trade Representative issued a draft that the president planned to renegotiate NAFTA. That was the first awareness that we had officially that President Trump wanted to get out of NAFTA. Then a couple of weeks later, on May 18th, Bob Lighthizer, who is the U.S. Trade Representative, sent a formal notice to Congress that the administration intended to renegotiate NAFTA. And then, of course, just 4 weeks ago, on July 1st, 2020, the USMCA was implemented. So basically, from the time that we had an official announcement to the time that the trade agreement was implemented was 3 years and 3 months. So, of course, between our two countries, and we have had our legal, tax, and fiscal update for the last couple of years, we have seen the normal changes to rules and regulations, both in the United States and Mexico. But now we also had added to that the effects of the USMCA implementation and, of course, COVID-19. So we're going to have John and Eliel get started with the investment prospects and the economic outlook. John and Eliel, thank you very much for joining us, and turning it over to you.
Thanks, Ralph. This is John Milner here, Baker Tilly here in Mexico. Thank you very much for having me on, and it's good morning to all of our participants. Certainly very happy to be here with you. But Eliel Amaya and myself will be sharing this presentation. Eliel is our partner on trade commerce. So we're going to speak briefly about the environment in Mexico, but the macro business environment in Mexico, and also how this affects the new trade agreement and the investment and environment going forward. So to start off, we have a few slides here, which I thought would be helpful. This is basically an analysis of how we see the impact in terms of the industry, in terms of low, medium, and high risk. And the impact on profits. So obviously anything to do with media, telecoms, healthcare, technology has done very well in this period of time. And obviously anything to do with working remotely is for anybody who is dedicated to that business has done extremely well. For the moderate risk industries, we see moderate impact in professional services, education, utilities, public sector, and then negative impact on the moderate risk industries for natural resources, financial services. With the high impact, high risk, we see consumer and retail. I think here we need to split it up. Anything to do with the food business has done well. Anything to do with high end has suffered dramatically. Aerospace, defense, a lot of that has been put on hold. Construction, engineering as well. Travel and tourism has been almost destroyed in the short term. And manufacturing, I think, is a mixed bag. A lot of it negatively impacted and depends where it's anything that's related to pharmaceuticals has done really well. On the next slide, on the same slide, we look at the impact in terms of how it has impacted these industries. So obviously, some businesses have been able to adjust. So anybody that's working from home office, online schooling has managed, probably not as well as being in a traditional scenario. I think many of us forget that schooling, the most important part of schooling is to be able to be in physical contact. Obviously the social importance of school, university, and that's all been dramatically impacted. Much of the learning is done from working with peers and colleagues, and also this would apply to universities, business schools. In the low risk business, greater demand for medical services and pharmaceuticals. Supply chain is a big thing here. So we're a supply chain, probably for those of us who are working in professional services, our supply chain is quite simple. We just we get onto WebEx or Zoom. But where we're talking about complex manufacturing, distribution chains, it becomes more complicated. So obviously all of these factors have to be considered when we figure out how we're going to go forward from here. So in terms of one of the things that's really come out of here is the importance of technology. So when we look at these kind of 4 takeaways, starting on the corner on the bottom right-hand corner, supply chain strategy has to be, we really have to rethink all of this and be more flexible and see how we can react. Obviously, people like Amazon, where we see in Mexico, we have a lot of traditional retailers who have really struggled with supply chains because people like Amazon are just, they were ready and they were able to respond. And the traditional, we'll say, retail stores have just had an awful time trying to deliver the products and then being able to deal with returns. And Amazon is just way ahead of the game on all of that. E-commerce becomes so important. So anybody that was not in e-commerce has been struggling. So this is really key going forward. Remote services and collaboration, obviously what we're doing today. And then when we get to governance, how we spend, financial risk insight, how we manage our businesses, we have to become much more intelligent in terms of governance of our business, corporate governance, how we move forward, how we manage risks, strategic risks, operational risks, and then how we develop controls to be able to mitigate these risks. A number of a number of data points for the Mexican economy is probably many ways similar to many of certainly to the US. I think we looked at, a 32% drop in GDP in Q2 in the second quarter in the US. In Mexico, it was 19% negative growth rate, which was huge for the second quarter, which will definitely be rebounding. When we look at the macro situation, interest rates, absolute interest rates have come down. So if we look at the TA, which is the lending rate, 5%, 5.2%, that was up around 8% a couple of months back in March. The deposit rate, 4.8%. These are obviously much higher than in the US. Inflation has certainly come under control, 3.3%. So you're looking at real positive or high interest rates. But the expectation is that the interest rates will come down between now and the end of the year. The exchange rate has improved. The US dollar peso had gone up to 24.25. We're now down in the region of 22. And the expectation is that this will improve between now and the end of the year. The overall situation in terms of dollar reserves for the economy, $186 billion is healthy. And also when you look at the government has also access to some quite extensive lines of credit from international organizations like IMF. So overall, that situation is quite healthy. So when you look at the macro finances, they are pretty good. The debt, if you look at public debt as a percentage of GDP, it's around 55, 56%, which is quite good. It's gone up from maybe 12 points from last year, but it's still a very manageable number. Just briefly at the stock market, it's suffered a little more than the Dow has come down, or certainly at this point, I think it was Thursday or Friday, 2 or 3% from its high, and the Mexican market is down 9%. So before I hand over to Eliel, just a few data points. The expectation for the economy this year is to have negative GDP of between 9 and 12%. So BBA is projecting minus 10% growth for this year, which for the following year, there are a number of different estimates, but they're all between 2 and 4.5%. So there is an expectation that there will be a rebound for the economy next year, but it's very, very uncertain. And the overall climate, both in Mexico, US, and also globally, internationally, is extremely uncertain because of COVID. It's interesting to point out, Eliel is going to talk about exports. There was a huge drop in April and May for exports from Mexico to the US. These exports rebounded 75% in June because of the US industrial market or factories coming back. But it's very uncertain because of the increase in the cases of COVID. It's likely that the industrial situation in the US is going to be very uncertain. So that may come back because of COVID, and a lot of states are now beginning to shut back down. So that's going to have an immediate impact on Mexico. So the scenario is very uncertain. So overall, where the expectation is that the economy will take a significant drop, a big impact, social impact in Mexico, unemployment, tourist industry, which is so important. Mexico has got 3 major sources of foreign currency: tourism, which is negatively impacted, Pemex, which oil prices are not doing very well, and also remittances from the US. So all of these will be impacted and are being impacted significantly. So I think I think with that, I'm going to hand over to Eliel. Eliel, do you want me to continue this, or will I just you're gonna put up your own screen?
Let me see if I can put on my own screen. Yes, I'm right here.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, John. I go straight forward to the analysis. I guess we all know how important is the USMCA for the region. We have some couple of numbers here. Maybe you can go to that later. But I guess what is important to just point out here is that Mexico continue being a very, very important player in terms of exporting to US and also to receiving goods from US. Now, if we look at this table, we can see that we are nearly very close to Canada in terms of value of the goods. But as you can see, the total of the overall the commerce that is being held by US within Mexico still under some pressure here. That was the principal driver to make changes in the old NAFTA, now the USMCA. Now, if we look at the perspective from state to state, we can see that at least 39 of the US states in United States export to Mexico. And from those, Mexico is the top 5 in their list. We can see here what is the percentage of exports that are related to each one of the states, and what is the value of that. This is very, very important for most of the border countries. Sorry, for the border, yeah, for the border at least states, and the economic that they do have is very, very combined. Now, if we look at what are the goods that are being exported from US to Mexico, we see here that oil and gas are the biggest portion in terms of value, but in the combination of all goods, we also have electronic, transportation goods, chemical, machinery and equipment, and many, many others. Now, if we take the same perspective, but now coming out of Mexico to US, certainly is our partner for more than 77% of the export. And if we go to the states, we can see that these are more related to the northern part of the country, and that is also the states that are close to the border. Now, if we go to the goods, we can see also that we have agricultural products, some oil and gas as the main goods that are being shipped from Mexico to US, but also we have transportation goods, and that mainly refers to the automobile industry. That is going to be an industry that we'll see shifting from Mexico to US, especially for the core part that are mandatory to have a higher regional value. We'll go through that in a couple of slides. So we made an analysis to see which industries were more affected in this USMCA. And what we'll see here is that we break down the industry in the major products that are being interchanged between US and Mexico. And regardless of the duty that we can see here, I would say that in case the USMCA regional value is not met, then the duty is not necessarily as high for some of the products, but for agricultural products and food, it is very, very high. We see here in the automotive industry that the impact will be as high in automobiles of 2.5% of the value if those automobiles doesn't meet the criteria when are being exported from Mexico to the US. But on the contrary, if the cars are export from US to Mexico, then the duty is 20%. Now, for other industries such as pharmaceutical, electronic, mining, and so on, that we have here in this slide, you can see that the impact is relatively low because of the duty is very, very low. Now, the industries that were most affected within the USMCA certainly was the automotive industry because of the change of rules. That means that most of the OEMs will refocus where their strategic suppliers will be located. Most of them will be choose from the United States because they will raise the value by just locating the production there. But also we can see that there are other industries that are going to be benefited by the USMCA, such as pharmaceutical, chemical industry, and anything that has to do with intellectual property. And this is mainly related because of the change of regulations and the strengthening of the regulations, at least in Mexico, to cover most of intellectual property. That will use more digital business within the region. And I think that's going to be something good for the region. That is going to be something that we need to focus on. And well, the growth will continue in agricultural, and most of that due to the interrelation that we have already within Mexico and US. Also, the USMCA will cover some specific chapter for small businesses that are being trying to be integrated into the supply chain. So I guess it's a good time to refocus our efforts on that specific segment as well. Now, along with the COVID, the changes within the USMCA will lead us to reshape all the supply chain for most of the industries, trying to set up whatever brings you the most USMCA value on the finished product in the country that it could be produced. But we have to keep in mind that Mexico is still a low-cost country, and as I mentioned, due to the COVID-19 as well, most of the supply chain now are refocusing to keep at least within the same continent the production. So we'll see a couple of changes there. We are facing a new era where I believe it is worth to go through your business and review whether to move part of the production from Asia to Mexico, and maybe also to consider if you are an automotive industry supplier, focus also in the United States. So most of those changes will happen during this year and the following year. I guess this is something that we'll continue talking through these events. So, John, I don't know if you have any closing comment on these brief slides and where the economic overview of Mexico and the industries that are being affected by the USMCA.
Just briefly, Eliel, thank you very much. I think it's a moving photograph, and I think we're going to have to keep in touch daily, weekly. The unraveling situation with COVID is, nobody knows where we're going to be in 1 month, 2 months, 6 months from now. So it's really important to keep in touch with all of the developments. And I think the new trade agreement is obviously a positive thing for us. But obviously it's going to be in a context of a difficult environment over this year and next year. So thank you very much thank you very much, Eliel, and thank you very much for the audience.
I turn over to Hugo, I believe.
Ralph, your microphone. I think it's Hugo.
Yes, Ralph is muted.
Okay, I'm not muted anymore. Thank you very much, John and Eliel, for a excellent lead into the next three presentations. The first two are going to be done by Hugo Dubovoy, who's an international partner with the firm of Baker McKenzie. And Hugo, we thank you and Baker very much for sponsoring our webinar series as we go forward. I think we're going to have a lot of good topics coming up for our audience.
You're
And
most
the
welcome.
second speaker will be Margarita Escalante, an associate partner with Barnes & Thornburg. Both Hugo and Margarita spend all of their days, every day, dealing with clients with issues in Mexico. Hugo is going to begin by talking a little bit about the USMCA and particularly certificates of origin, the labor matters, and also the investor-state dispute settlements. And Margarita is going to cover the legal issues now covering energy, food and beverage, and technology and data. So Hugo, turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Yeah, so as Ralph said, given the limited time that we have, I will focus my presentation on some topics arising directly out of the USMCA. and some related Mexican legal developments to comply with Mexico's obligations under the USMCA. The USMCA took effect just a month ago on July 1, and it's similar to NAFTA in many respects, but it updates some of its chapters and it added some new chapters. Some of the most critical novelties are with respect to rules of origin, and in particular regarding the auto industry, on which Margarita will talk later, and also certificates of origin, labor matters, and the investor state dispute resolution mechanism. So if any investor from the US or Mexico, for example, have a problem arising from unwarranted actions from the other government, they can file claims, and the effect of the changes in this respect on investment protection. Moving on to certificates of origin, it is necessary to qualify for USMCA benefits to qualify that a product qualifies as originating. And that is evidenced by a certificate of origin. New ones will be required. New certificates of origin are not required under the USMCA, and all of the old ones under NAFTA are no longer valid. It is worthwhile to talk a minute about what originating means and does not mean. Simply buying something that is in the US or that was manufactured in the US, for example, does not make it originating. There are 4 tests. The first one is to determine whether the good is wholly obtained or produced in the USMCA region, but this one is a very limited application. It applies, for example, to things like silver mined from a silver mine in Mexico or cattle born and raised in the United States, but again, very limited application. One that is of much broader application is that the good must be transformed in the USMCA region, involving a change in tariff classification, so some degree of transformation, and or meeting a regional value content test. The third test is that the goods are produced exclusively from originating materials. And the last one, that unassembled and disassembled goods and parts are classified just like the finished product. With respect to who can issue a certificate of origin, producers, exporters, and importers can do it. That importers are now allowed to issue certificates of origin is an addition in the USMCA. That was not the case under NAFTA. But if they do it, if importers do issue the certificate of origin, they must possess all records necessary to prove that the relevant good is originating and keep them for 5 years post-entry into the relevant country. So this can signify a significant burden on the importer. This is an excellent opportunity to review the support documentation that companies have and to ensure that it is sufficient, because many of the origin analysis date back many years. NAFTA was 25 plus years old when it stopped being in effect. And so those studies could have been prepared at the beginning of that period. And also the teams, the people who conducted them, who were knowledgeable of the relevant issues, might not be around anymore. So this is very important that companies go back and review their files and see that they have sufficient documentation to support the origin of the products. Switching to labor matters, this was one of the most hotly contested topic during the process of ratification of the NAFTA, negotiation and ratification, of the USMCA. And unlike NAFTA, the USMCA has a chapter devoted to this topic. Under NAFTA, there was only a side letter with no sharp teeth. This one, this time, has very sharp teeth. All 3 countries are required to recognize International Labor Organization obligations, including freedom of association, which in turn includes the right to strike, and freedom from violence, threats, and intimidation, and the right to collective bargaining. And this is something that is very prevalent in Mexico, in manufacturing operations, many times even in service service provision activities. In Mexico, it is very common to have unions, and sometimes they are active and sometimes they are not. One of the practices in Mexico that now the USMCA and changes to Mexican law seek to change is that in the past, some dishonest unions would threaten a strike if the employer, if the company did not enter into a collective bargaining agreement with them. And really all they wanted was to extract some money from the company. So the companies reacting to that practice, which was grounded in a deficiency of Mexican law, what they essentially did was enter into collective bargaining agreements with friendly unions that really did not represent the employees. Sometimes the employees didn't even know that a union existed or that there was a collective bargaining agreement. And by registering that collective bargaining agreement, they would preempt a hostile, dishonest union from coming and creating havoc by threatening to shut down operations. So this is very frequent in Mexico, and that's why this point is so relevant. In theory, the obligations, labor obligations under the USMCA can be enforced by the three parties, but in practice, they are really focused on Mexico. And the USMCA provides for an enforcement mechanism that allows a country to address a denial of rights, that's a defined term that we'll look into in a minute, at a covered facility, another defined term. This is a facility-specific rapid response labor mechanism. The term denial of rights is defined as a violation of the rights to freedom of association or to collective bargaining. And a covered facility is a facility in a priority sector, which is very broad, in Mexico. So this only applies to Mexico, that produces goods or supplies services traded between the party countries or competes with goods or services of another party country. This second Romanette is very significant because it does not even require that the products or services be traded between the party countries. It suffices for them to compete with goods or services of another party country. Once invoked, the rapid response labor mechanism can lead to, among others, loss of preferential tariff benefits, customs penalties, or denial of entry of goods. As you see, some of the main benefits of the USMCA can be denied if something goes wrong in this area. And a big potential problem is that anyone can file an allegation. It doesn't have to be the government, doesn't have to be a union or the workers. It can be anybody, including a non-governmental organization and even a competitor. So going back to Romanet 2 that I mentioned, let's say that a company in the US manufactures products in Mexico for export to the US, and it has a competitor that only manufactures and sells in the US. So if the competitor detects that there is a problem with the Mexican company complying with its labor obligations, it can file one of these claims. These allegations against Mexican facilities would be filed with the US government, which would have 30 days to decide whether there's sufficient credible evidence of a denial of rights, and 60 days to decide whether to request a rapid response labor panel. The US may notify Mexico for Mexico to investigate, attempt to remediate, and agree or disagree that a denial of rights took place, for the US and Mexico to agree on a solution without interrupting trade before referring the matter to a rapid response labor panel. If the matter is referred to one of these panels, the panel will attempt to verify whether a denial of rights took place. Mexico would be asked to consent to an on-site verification at the facility, accompanied by observers from each country. And the rapid response labor panel would issue its decision, and its remedies would last at least 180 days. Another significant feature is that apart from a denial of rights, the rapid response labor mechanism can be expanded if Mexico fails to enforce its own labor laws. For example, a failure to appoint and train inspectors or a failure to investigate violations. So its application can be broader than what I initially mentioned. Switching to investment protection, this is a key topic because, of course, all foreign investors want to have adequate protection of their investment in a foreign country. And unfortunately, the investment arbitration chapter of the USMCA weakens the protection that was afforded by NAFTA. So if a company is interested in maintaining the same kind of protection that it had under NAFTA, proactive planning or perhaps a corporate reorganization will be necessary. And this restructure or this planning should include an entity from a country with which Mexico has a good investment protection treaty, which, as I mentioned, does not include the USMCA. Mexico has multiple investment protection treaties with countries throughout the world, but not specifically with the United States. The reason that the protection is weakened is, for one, it only applies to the US and Mexico. Canada is out from the USMCA with respect to this kind of investor-state dispute resolution. And the scope of what can be the matter of one of these claims is reduced. It has been reduced with respect to some of the matters, like minimum standard of treatment, which includes fair and equitable treatment and full protection and security. These are terms of art with specific definitions, or indirect expropriation, like could be, for example, the unwarranted denial of a permit that a company needs to operate. So these could be the subject of a claim under NAFTA, but not under the new investor-state arbitration rules of the USMCA. This has an exception, which is with respect to government contracts in certain sectors, like oil and gas, power generation, telecom, infrastructure, and transportation. Another limitation is that a foreign investor would be required to litigate in Mexico for 30 months prior to bringing a claim under NAFTA. This 30-month litigation requirement also has the exception of the above sectors. As I mentioned, Mexico has investment protection treaties with multiple countries, which you can see here, some of which you can see here. To comply with the USMCA and other international treaties to which Mexico is a party, Mexico recently amended its federal criminal code and its copyright law and issued an entirely new intellectual property protection law. In the interest of time, I will not go over some of the principal characteristics of these changes, but you can see them in the presentation and this slide and the upcoming slides. So summing it up, companies should verify that they have solid support documentation to qualify for USMCA tariff relief. And they should be mindful that their current NAFTA certificates of origin are no longer valid, and that new USMCA certificates of origin must be used. Also, companies need to ensure that they comply with Mexican labor law, including with respect to their relationship with unions. Otherwise, the consequences can be very serious. And what this means is that in case of companies that have an active collective bargaining agreement with a union that actively represents the interests of the workers, the collective bargaining agreement needs to be validated by May 1 of 2023, which involves a new procedure set forth in the Mexican law to ensure that the unions indeed represent the workers. And if, for example, your company has an inactive collective bargaining agreement, then that's a sign that it might already be in breach of Mexican labor law and the USMCA, and steps should be taken to review the situation towards terminating that agreement and ensuring that an agreement that qualifies is entered into, that qualifies as compliant under the USMCA is entered into, or if the employees are not necessarily interested in joining a union, then to educate them to study the labor environment so that they are happy employees that are not necessarily ready to accept an invitation of unions in the future that will very likely come to become union members. And lastly, to be better protected, US investors planning to invest significantly in Mexico or that already have significant investments in Mexico should review their corporate structures to consider adding, unless they're already there, companies from countries with which Mexico has a good investment protection treaty so that they do not fall victim to the weakened protection under the USMCA. Thank you very much. And with this, I'll turn it back to Ralph.
Hugo, thank you very much for a great presentation. And now for the next portion of the legal considerations, we turn it over to Margarita. Margarita, it's all yours.
Everyone, good morning. I'm Margarita Escalante. I am an attorney both in the US and in Mexico, and I head the Mexico practice for Barnes and Thornburg, a law firm with an international trade practice in their top 5. We have offices from coast to coast. I'm going to, rather than focusing on general updates, I'm going to give you updates that are industry specific. So as Hugo mentioned earlier, a few of these, I'll start with at least the automotive industry. I'll give a few updates both on the USMCA side and non-USMCA side. So starting with USMCA, as we noted, the regional value content has changed from NAFTA to USMCA. Originally, we either had 62.5 or 60% for passenger vehicles and light trucks or heavy trucks and automotive parts. Those have now changed in 2020 to 66% for light trucks. They've remained at 60% for heavy trucks, although those will be increased in 2027 to 70%. And auto parts have changed depending on the type of part. As you see in the table that I included in the slide provided by USITC, there's 3 types of parts. Those are the green squares. It's either core parts, which you'll have to reach 75%, principal parts, which is 70%, or complementary parts, which is 65%. Another one that we'll be facing, which I failed to mention, was under light trucks, you have to reach a 75% by 2023, although we're currently at 66%. Now, another change under USMCA is the requirement for aluminum and steel. Originally, there was no set percentage required, and now we have a 70% for each of them. And as Hugo mentioned, there's a new labor content required on manufacturing in general, but it applies to automotive. Now, speaking of a little bit more general terms, automotive is one of the industries that is mostly being hit by COVID, as mentioned earlier by the Baker Tilly team. The sales have gone down. I think it was reported this morning, give or take 30% over the past quarter. So it's something to definitely keep an eye on. Some are COVID related, but there's also certain changes that are going on the legal side, in addition to USMCA. One of those is an amendment to the general rules of foreign trade in Mexico. So if you've come to one of these presentations in the past, you've heard one of us say AAA or AAA modality in the past. Those concepts under the VAT certification are officially scrapped. If you have a VAT certification or we're in the process of getting one, you now either have it or you don't. You're not under any modality. Now, this is my sandwich slide where I give you good news, bad news, and good news. The good news is it simplified it for a few companies, especially foreign companies that didn't understand Mexican law in general. Now you get into the specifics of the modalities of the certification. It wasn't the easiest process. So it's now simplified. Same rules apply to everybody. Now the negative is that some benefits that may have applied to you no longer apply. Tax and customs irregularities that you could have fixed under certain modalities, you no longer can do that. Raw materials that you could have imported for up to 36 months, those are reduced to 18 months. Certain consolidation that you could do, whether it was of cargo or documentation, that was reduced. And the main thing that was eliminated was the refund period went back to the standard that we had of 40 days. Now, the good news is that shifted back to the current CTP in Mexico, which is the OEA program. Those benefits are now under that program. So if you have the VAT certification, if you have the MX program and don't have an OEA program, now's a good time to get it. Now, the only issue that we still have is the reduced refund period didn't make it into the benefits of the OEA program. What does that mean? That means that you'll get your refund within 40 days like any other company. There's a big push to avoid these. This amendment was put into place within the past 3 weeks, actually 10, 11 days ago. So there's a big push to either get that benefit back within the VAT program or within the OEA program. Now, the other update that we have is that the industry-specific registrations that used to be required before, those have gone away as well. In the agricultural, food, and beverage industry, we also have both USMCA and not USMCA updates. On the USMCA side, as a lot of us know, there were big dairy updates, sugar, poultry, peanuts, wheat. Most of those related to the cross-border relationship between Canada and the US, not so much with Mexico, although some restrictions remain in relation to Mexico. The biggest update probably for Mexico is that there's now regulations in relation to alcohol. The golden rule that do unto others as you'd like to be done unto you applies to alcohol now imports into Mexico or the US or Canada, which is you'll treat our alcohol the same way you'll treat yours. So in the US, where some states have a tiered system, that will apply to international imports as well from the region. Now, where we'll probably see a big change is there's markup restrictions on alcohol. So those imports that came either from Mexico if you're in the US or vice versa, they'll be restricted from being highly marked up. The biggest change though in relation to food and beverage relates to a local ordinance that was updated within the past few months, and that's NOM 51. You'll start seeing, if you go to Mexico, even if just for tourism reasons, or if you did, because you're currently all stuck at home, you would have seen a set of labels. You may have noticed a set of labeling that was updated a few years ago. The new labels as of this year, actually starting October 2020, are those that you see on the slide. Those labels are made to give notice to consumers of excessive calories, excessive sodium, fats, and sugar, also caffeine and sweeteners. Now, any product that reaches the threshold that requires these labels on your products cannot allow, you won't be able to advertise or market to children. Now, that doesn't only mean commercials and general advertising, but it also means you can't have designs or labels on your products that are meant for children. So Tony the Tiger on the equivalent of your cornflakes here in the US, the Zucaritas in Mexico can no longer be on the box. What is the timing for this? As I mentioned earlier, October 2020 is when they have to start including them. They're gonna phase them in based on the content of the product. So the goal is that these products, rather than eventually all having a label on them, they actually reduce the amount of sugar or fat that they have on them. So hopefully not as many products will need to have the labels on them. Advertising restrictions will kick in April 2021. And then the next two phases will be October 2023 and October 2025. Now, technology and digital trade. This is probably amongst the biggest updates in USMCA, at least as it relates to my clients. And that's, there's a new chapter, chapter 19 on digital trade. Now, I'll skip the first point that you see under there, but generally, these are all great changes. They're somewhat vague, they're somewhat general. It's more of a collaborate. We'll collaborate to make sure there's personal information protection. The three countries will make sure that they have laws in place that protect personal information, but there's really it's not really specific. Where we do see some specific terms are in relation to source code and hosting. There's the specific obligation that you can't have that you can't force a company to host data in your region, in your country, There's also an obligation that you can't force a company to give you their source code if they're coming into your country, except in very specific circumstances. This is a way to protect companies from being able to keep their source code in their own jurisdictions. But again, it feels a little bit green. If you ask me personally, meaning the chapter feels a little bit green, because you can tell they're going to be working on it, working on the regulations as you go. So this is one of the areas where we expect to see the countries raise their hand and say, I don't think that complies with what we agreed with. An example of that is the digital tax that just kicked in Mexico. So amongst the updates that we have that aren't USMCA related is in June 1st, they officially force digital companies to pay taxes, both VAT and the income taxes. And this applies to companies like Netflix, like Facebook. And so one of the main questions was, doesn't this clash with what USMCA said? What USMCA says is, not only will you protect our technologies that are coming into your country, but you won't have a duty on them. And so the digital tax seems to a certain extent, do that for foreign, meaning US or Canadian technologies. So that is currently being discussed. The federal government has said, no, the digital tax does not clash or is not considered a duty on imports of technologies. But we'll see how the US addresses it over the next few months. And then, as Ralph mentioned, one other update that we've seen related to USMCA is energy. There's a new Chapter 8 in USMCA. It contains a whole 2 paragraphs, and it's really meant as a political chapter. It's a chapter on recognizing that Mexico owns its hydrocarbons. It recognizes what the current Mexican Constitution says. It is really a political statement on the Mexican side, which doesn't really create obligations or rights for any of the parties. Now, as Hugo did mention, though, there are provisions that relate to oil and gas, to energy in general within USMCA, the most important being the the dispute settlement mechanism. And my last update is, we usually avoid getting political in these, so it's not really a legal update, although we've seen cancellation of renewable energy auctions, so it is worth mentioning, although I'll avoid getting political. As I was preparing this presentation, I recalled a few years back doing a similar presentation on the energy reform back in the day, and I realized we've been doing these for a while. Back in 2014, the energy industry in Mexico was privatized, and so it opened the doors to a lot of foreign investment. Within the past few months, the current Mexican government has said, you know what, there's a few that may be tainted by corruption, a few investment opportunities that may be tainted by corruption. So let's cancel some auctions that were in place. So that hit the news pretty strongly. We heard it all the way to Chicago plenty. But in general, it wasn't we're revoking the energy reform of 2014. Now, there has been a slight threat of reversal for the second half of the current president's term. There's also been a reference to the possibility of there being a referendum, but there's no legal update per se, other than the fact that the auctions were canceled within the past few months. There have been new opportunities set in place. There have been messages that investment is obviously still welcomed in the industry, but it's one of those where the science haven't been entirely clear. And that is it on my end. You're in mute, Rael.
Okay. All right, here I go. Margarita, thank you. Ugo, thank you for good updates on the legal side. And now we're going to get to tax and accounting. Scott Snickenberger, who is the Global Transaction Services Partner for Plant Moran, has covered this in the past. And of course, he's always brought up the normal changes to rules and regulations in Mexico and how it affects companies and clients. But now we have the effects of the implementation of the USMCA, and we also have COVID-19. So we may have a lot of things going on here. And Scott, we leave it up to you to tell us about it. So over to you now, ma'am.
Sounds great. Wow, let's make sure everyone can see my screen and we'll move from there. There we go. Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us all this morning. And as Ralph mentioned, I'll give a little bit of a quick tax update. And as a quick agenda, we'll cover some of the tax incentives or lack thereof related to COVID-19 in Mexico. We'll start there. And then I will add a little bit more detail to the new value-added tax on digital transactions that Margarita mentioned. We'll talk about some changes that are coming for VAT certified companies in more detail that Margarita also mentioned. And then we'll wrap up with just some commentary on what we're seeing in the current environment related to delays and other issues in getting IMEXs and other processes through the Mexican government. So as I alluded to, you may have noticed that you haven't seen a lot of emails and other notices from folks talking about incentives, tax deferrals, filing extension deadlines from all of us in the community related to Mexico. And that's because there haven't been many. So the Mexican government has taken more of an approach that they will be asking companies to file and remit taxes just as things were before COVID, before the pandemic. So virtually all of companies were still required to file their 2019 annual returns on March 31st and pay their taxes. So everything for the most part is status quo. We've seen a few things come through. So for example, we saw an option where there was a deferral option laid out for certain payroll taxes. But I'd say where we were disappointed in those is that they required payment of interest that was significantly higher than the cost of capital for most of our clients. So they really didn't make a whole lot of sense. We've heard some rumors, there have been some discussions about some more meaningful changes that have not come to fruition. For example, one thing that we heard about, and there were talks back in June on reducing the value-added tax rate nationally in Mexico to 10%. However, I have not heard anything recently on that, and I suspect that unfortunately that one is dead. We can hope that it's something like that, it's that or something similar will come back to light. But I think it depends upon who has the political pull to get that done in Mexico, and the answer for right now is not much. There have been some limited extensions and other items provided by certain municipalities. Now, one option that's out there, though, I would want to spend a minute on is an option to apply to have your estimated payments reduced in Mexico. So the issue that we have is that in Mexico, your estimated tax payments, your income tax estimates, are based upon your prior year's profit coefficient. So essentially the percentage of tax on your gross revenue that you paid in the prior year. And then what happens in the following year is you pay monthly tax estimates, assuming that you will have that same level of profitability on your gross income. However, as many of you know, and many of us have seen, profitability is down for 2020. So there is a regulation out there, a law out there that says that companies can apply to, in certain circumstances, and saying my profitability is going to be lower, I would like to reduce my estimated payments for the rest of the year. Now, it's fair to say that this is not automatic. It's a approval process you have to go through. And we've seen, I'd say, mixed results. So we've seen some that have gone through and have been approved. And we've seen others that frankly had better fact scenario that were denied for reasons that didn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's worth giving a shot if you believe this could be a significant cash flow savings to your organization. However, just as you see on the last item on the page there, this doesn't reduce your tax bill for the year. It just reduces your estimated payments. So if that could be helpful to you, it's something you could certainly consider. But other than that, it's really been limited. The tax benefits or tax deferrals in Mexico have been limited related to COVID. So now I will jump to and provide a little bit more detail on the new digital transaction tax that Mexico has put into place that Margarita alluded to. So this new rule is in the value-added tax law and is effective on June 1. And what it's really getting at is that Mexico is trying to capture in their value-added tax more transactions. So that law was more based upon transfers of goods, sales of goods, shipments of goods. And the Mexican government realized that, well, you know what, there's a lot going on now that doesn't really fall under those shipment rules and moving product. And so now these new rules apply to digital transactions, and it's business to business transactions, business to consumer transactions. And it's also important to note that it applies to intermediaries. And what they mean there is that if you are the app that is acting as an intermediary between a buyer and the seller, this digital transaction tax applies to you. And what it really does is it means that the value-added tax applies to the transaction. So there are certain areas where it's pretty clear that these rules apply. It would be like Margarita's examples, Uber, Netflix, those types of things. It's very clear that it applies to those transactions. Gaming is another one that they wanted to capture. However, it doesn't apply to things like e-books, newspapers, those types of things. So that type of content that's transmitted. So as is common with some of the new rules that come into Mexico, there's quite a bit of uncertainty as to some of the other transactions that may or may not apply to. So some cases that we've gotten into with our clients and contacts where it's less clear would be things like the use of certain technologies between companies and their subsidiaries. Not 100% clear as to how or whether the tax applies. Another one that I've seen very commonly would be in the restaurant industry, franchises, where you have an app that's developed somewhere else and it's used by franchisees or the franchisees' customers. Again, not 100% clear. You have to look at the facts and circumstances and determine how it applies. The other difficult part that we've seen with this new rule is that one of the requirements is that if a foreign company is now required to register in Mexico and to collect and pay the tax. And the process, which has been completed by several companies, and it is published by the Mexican government, and you can see who's out there and registered, but the process is fairly cumbersome. And I would say that at least for my client base, they're being required to provide some information that they're not 100% comfortable with. But there have been, as I said, many companies that have successfully registered. They include Uber, Netflix, Microsoft with Azure, many companies that you have heard of before, and that you know that those of us that work and travel in Mexico know that are operating in Mexico. It is absolutely an administratively cumbersome process to register. And I would say that we've gotten some questions back, requests for information that aren't necessarily detailed out in the rules. So if you are registering, you need to be ready to roll the punches, because I would suspect there will be some things that you'll need to provide that you might not have thought of. The other thing that's interesting to me is that the registration process does have to be completed in person in Mexico City. So that is a little bit difficult in the current environment. And then we've also had to do, as you see on the bottom of the page there, we had to do quite a bit of professional translation and notarization, apostille of documents, which in a normal environment is not that difficult to complete. I would say in the pandemic environment, I can just tell you with our clients, it has been cumbersome and it's taken longer than normal. So that it's a high level of red tape. I'd say the most difficult item, the thing that has held up the process for us in more cases than others, is this first bullet on this slide here. So for those of you that are not familiar with U.S. tax residency certificates, they're issued by the U.S. Treasury. So it's a letter that comes out from U.S. Treasury. In a normal environment, in a non-COVID fully operating environment, they take 60 to 90 days to get from U.S. Treasury. Right now, we're looking at more like 120, 150 days. So we've heard some rumors that Treasury is starting to get that process back on track and they will start to catch up. But I suspect that they have a significant backlog to get through. And unfortunately, without this residency certificate, you cannot proceed. So what I suspect is that with the companies that you see that have already filed, they already had requested and had those residency certificates on hand. They didn't have to request them. For those that have to request them, it's going to take some time. I'm going to jump now to the changes in the customs law that Margarita had mentioned, and as she commented, the different modalities, the A, AA, and AAA have been combined, and certain benefits have been taken away. I'd say that the areas that are affecting my clients the most as we've gotten into this, and there's certainly more analysis to complete because this was just released on July 24th. It's really in that third bullet point there. So many of my clients, especially those that are deep in manufacturing supply chains, so in industrial, electronics, automotive, they have certain goods that they had kept in-house for automotive service parts or other items. They really needed that 36-month maximum period that was permitted under the previous rules, and that for goods that these IMEX companies brought in, as Margarita mentioned, is now down to 18 months. I would say that 18 months in many cases is manageable. Where I'm really having difficulty with clients is, let's just say that you have a commitment with your customer that you're going to have service parts on hold for some period of time. Those parts are manufactured, part of it is manufactured by another company, so that product is virtually transferred in Mexico. Now you have 6 months maximum to have those parts on hand. So what that potentially means for many companies is that they will have to change the importation status of those products to permanent. They'll have to pay the VAT to keep those goods on hand in Mexico for the period they've committed to their customers. And then, then we go look at the second bullet point there. And then, now that I have that extra VAT outlay that again could be significant, the Mexican government has delayed the period of time in which I can obtain those VAT refunds. So with all of the things going on within Mexico with the pandemic and with the delays in getting these VAT refunds processed, it's kind of like a double whammy, triple whammy for a lot of companies related to their working capital and their cash flows. Now, in my opinion, my commentary, now is not a great time to tell companies that they're going to have more capital tied up with the Mexican government. So it's going to be difficult, and as Margarita mentioned, we're hoping that there will be some option out there, whether it's with the custom certification or otherwise, to try and reduce this. Because the thing I would say is that with many of my clients, even if they were, say, AAA certified and they're supposed to get their VAT refunds back in 15 days, they weren't getting them back in 15 days already. And so now it's going to be extended even further. So does that mean they're really going to process them in 40 days, or is it going to be 40 days plus, like we've seen in other cases? That's where it's going to get more difficult. So again, we hope and we know that the Maquila Association, the index, is lobbying hard against this to try and get some relief, and we hope to see something in the coming days and weeks. Unfortunately, I have, sorry to be Debbie Downer today, but unfortunately I have other bad news in what we've seen with our IMEX companies. And this is where, again, you know, maybe now we're at quadruple whammy. So the other area where we're seeing delays and additional requests for information, sometimes unreasonable, is with IMEX licenses. So when a new company is going into Mexico and starts its operation, has its facility, and is looking to get their IMEX license approved, I would say that, you know, prior to this year, the process could have been completed in a course of weeks up to a month. I now have clients that have for 7, 8 months been trying to get IMEX licenses approved. And it delays startup of operations. It means that some of these companies that had capacity issues and were expanding to Mexico to increase capacity are not able to do so. So it's limiting growth in Mexico. It's limiting hiring in Mexico. It's limiting investment in Mexico. Some of those I would say are due to changes in staffing and changes in process. So for example, the secretaries of economy that approved IMEX licenses around the country, those were in the past regional decisions, and all of that has now been moved to Mexico City. So part of that process has been delayed because it's now concentrated in Mexico City. And then I would say the other has just been frankly, unreasonable delays or unreasonable requests for information. So for example, I had an IMEX license request denied where the officials indicated that they wanted to see a 10-year lease on the facility, whereas the regulations require a 1-year lease on the facility. And my client said, I'm not really interested in signing a 10-year lease with my landlord. But that's what they've been asked to do. So things like that. So requests that are outside the rules, requests that are outside the norm, you could argue that they're unreasonable, but that's the type of thing that we're seeing. And what I would urge companies to do is that if you are looking to obtain an IMEX license, it also applies to the CEVA or the IVA certifications. You can expect those to take longer, and just there's going to be additional information requested. And so you should build that into your timelines because it's going to take longer to complete. And again, I hope that they will get this resolved because there are rumors of hundreds of IMEX licenses backlogged in Mexico City waiting for approval. And I really want to see Mexico do well. I think Mexico has a great opportunity related to USMCA and just manufacturing and other opportunities coming back from China and other parts of Asia. And I don't want this to hold up Mexico's progress. So I hope we're going to get through this. And again, I know that the index, the Maquiladora Association, is lobbying hard for this, and we need to break through this logjam. But I would recommend that companies expanding certainly include extra time in their investment plans. That was all I had. Ralph, I think I'll turn it back over to you, and then I think we're going to open things up for questions.
Thank you. We haven't received any questions. I got to check with Zoom to make sure that all the participants have an ability to ask questions, but we don't have a slot here on the screen for that. So let me ask a couple myself. Scott, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. And it's a shame it had to end with the last slide with delays. And I mean, obviously this is going to continue. And the longer it takes to get all of these applications processed, the longer it's going to take for Mexico to get new investment dollars for the economy. Margarita, on the auto industry, prior to July 1st, there was a lot of concern that, the small and mid-sized companies were going to have a problem in meeting the timeline for the rules of origin. It seemed like after July 1st passed, I haven't been reading a lot about that. From your knowledge and with your client base, have you been finding that, small and mid-sized companies are still having a problem getting their supply chains put together and being able to say, yes, verily we can meet all the obligations of the timeline that the USMCA has dictated?
Unfortunately, I think the focus has shifted in great part because of COVID. I think a lot of companies are making sure they can retain their employees, they can retain their customers. We've seen the big hit has been we've seen a lot of purchase orders be canceled. And so companies are more worried of making sure they're still part of that supply chain than making sure they're in compliance with NAFTA. Now, we also haven't seen a big push from the government to say, this is it, you have to be in compliance from one day to the next. We're expecting regulations to be set forth, including that are specifically geared towards small and medium businesses. So there hasn't been a big push, but there hasn't really been a big push on either side. The last thing to keep in mind is that there's a phase-in process. So it's not,
Right.
they don't have to be in compliance from one day to the next. So
Correct.
companies are aware of that, and they're keeping their focus again on more important matters like keeping their clients.
Right. Okay, very good. Ugo, on the certificates of origin, obviously, when we were in an NAFTA environment, there was a form that all companies could use to fill out to be in compliance when they are requesting zero duty. Now, it seems like the government has requested that data be provided, but that each company basically create their own spreadsheet to put in all the data. Is this correct?
Yes, so there's no more a prescribed form for the certificate of origin. Basically, what it should contain is spelled out, and then companies would prepare their certificate of origin, making sure that the prescribed content is included.
Have you been finding that a lot of companies, your clients, have had a difficulty in getting all of the data required? Because it seems like the onus now is on companies who trade to generate all of the data points that the government needs to make sure everybody is in compliance.
Yes, and that goes back to what I mentioned, that this is an opportunity to review what was done in the past and what has not been done, or to ensure that companies have sufficient and complete information on file. Because for many companies, these studies were done a long time ago, many years ago, and perhaps they don't have all the documentation readily available. And also the people that were engaged in doing all that work might not be around anymore. So that highlights the importance of going through that exercise. Also, because verifications of origin are one of those areas where the authorities of a country like Mexico Customs, has the authority to even come to the US and conduct on-site visits at US factories.
Right.
To verify, to ask questions, to review documentation. So the extent, the reach of the Mexican authorities is pretty broad in this area. And we've seen many proceedings that have to do with this, and with the added complexity that Scott mentioned in another context, but also applies here, where they are starting to ask for things that are not even required by law. And they look at them as requirements to validate origin. And if you don't satisfy them, and sometimes the requests are totally unreasonable, then you can get into trouble and having to litigate and filing proceedings in Mexico and investing a lot of time and an expense and things that you shouldn't.
Ugo, thank you. We do have some questions. Elizabeth has asked, are there any changes to the transfer pricing regulations recently? If anybody can address that.
Sure, I can jump in there, Ralph. So there have been some changes, not in the last couple months, but late last year, regarding the types of transactions that Mexico will require to be reported as a tax planning transaction. So the Mexican government continues to increase the types of, the breadth of the transactions they can consider to be tax planning that they view as having to be reported. So I'd be happy to discuss with whoever had the question exactly the details, but the answer is yes, and I would expect that trend to continue.
Okay, we have a question from Jose. What can you say about Mexican investments in the US being taxed on a capital gains basis, even if not realized yet?
Yep,
I think, Ralph,
I think he said he's talking about foreign exchange.
Okay.
Yep. So I think that, Jose, what you're referring to is our wonderful Section 987. So it's basically talks about transactions, foreign exchange transactions could be realized or unrealized that are taxed in the U.S. Without getting overly complex, the answer is yes. So Mexico does, the U.S. does take those as transactions that are subject to tax, depending on whether you have a gain or a loss. There are some fairly complex rules in terms of pooling transactions. There aren't any recent changes, that I'm aware of, related to 987. And I'd say where I see it in most cases is we have clients that bring back, let's say they sent funds down to Mexico, whether it was via debt or via equity. They bring some of those funds back. They don't think there's any taxable transaction there, and then they find out, oh boy, I've got one of those 987 foreign currency transaction gains that is going to increase my tax, and I didn't think about that. So if that doesn't answer your question, though, please don't hesitate to email me, and I'll be more than happy to help.
John, did you have a comment there at all?
Not really. I think it's something in the, it's something in the US arena. So I think Scott has probably given a good answer.
Okay, thank you. Ugo, on the labor provisions, it has been said that there's a huge pile of petitions that are going to be filed. We know that each of the chapters of the USMCA will have a separate committee made up of members of the three countries to consider the implementation. But I mean, from what you have seen, where are these petitions? What are they covering? Are they talking about process? Or are they talking about particular incidents where there have been violations already? Have you seen anything in that regard?
Recently, there was an incident with an attorney, an activist attorney in Chihuahua, in the area of Ciudad Juarez. Her name is Susana Prieto, and she's been around for a long time, creating havoc really in many companies. And she sometimes has been viewed as someone not really acting with total honesty. And so recently, I don't know the details of how this came to happen, but she was arrested. And so there was a petition to have her released under the argument essentially that Mexico was trying to prevent freedom of unionization and collective bargaining and the like.
Yeah.
And eventually it ended in her being released. I do not have an opinion as to whether she was legitimately or illegitimately arrested, but that is an example of things that have happened and of things to come. I know that Mexico is very concerned about this possibility because it could create great exposure for Mexican companies. I know that the Mexican government recently released a tool related to farm workers to prevent things like child labor and forced labor. Regarding certain products, many products that come into the U.S., like tomato, for example, coffee, and in particular in certain states, as a tool to help farmers get trained and learn the obligations that they will need to comply.
Okay. Margarita, a couple of months ago, we have a member in our chapter and you have a client that has been affected by what would be considered essential and non-essential activities.
I'm muting myself.
You're muting yourself? Okay, no, this is a general question. It has nothing to do specifically with that client, but with the situation that there are cases where Mexico has considered certain activities to be non-essential, whereas they are in the United States and Canada. Have you seen any effort that maybe this is going to be normalized as time goes on?
We're hoping it will be. Mexico has also started opening their doors to activities that are non-essential based but on region or based on specific industries. So we've seen certain companies going back to work. Now, it's a hard one because it's an unprecedented situation, and so a lot of companies don't even know if they're ready themselves to come back to business. So it's a tough one to answer. With all of that said, we're moving. It's phasing in again. It's the time of phasing in things in Mexico.
Right.
Hey, Ralph, this is John here. Just to jump.
John.
There's something a little bit outside the context, but it's still very relevant. Was that yesterday they announced that all of the primary, secondary schools are continue to be closed, and they're going to go back with TV classes. So you must remember you've a lot of kids or families in Mexico who don't have access to internet, phones, good online service. So what they're doing is you're going to have huge segment of the population with having class on TV. So I just want to let you know, I mean, it's not really very good because, there's going to be no enforcement, no teachers.
We're all nodding our heads in disregard in the back.
Yeah, John, my wife and I were talking about that for a half an hour this morning because my wife is a former school teacher in North Chicago, where the demographics are very poor. And, we were wondering how any of these either stay at home, go to school, or hybrid are going to affect kids in lower income areas where they don't have either access to computers and software or have family members who know how to operate computers. So, that sort of gets me to my last question because we're getting to be 11 o'clock. We were hitting our time just right. And that is just any comments from any of you as to when we may hit a new normal. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a lot of interim normals out there. And as Dr. Fauci sort of says, the coronavirus is going to control everything, not anything else. But obviously, our economic health and our real health in this country is we're going to be in a sort of a flux for a while. And, all of the issues that we're talking about, particularly as far as manufacturing is concerned, is going to be dictated about how all this plays out. So, I think everybody would say, but I'll let each of you comment on, how long it might take to get to a new normal.
Yeah, Ralph, I'd be happy to start. I think my general thought would be is that the answer to your question depends upon when a strong, antiviral or a vaccine is available. So
Right.
that's really what's going to drive the ship. Or we get to the point where we have, essentially herd immunity, and that would be long down the road, and I hope we don't have to go there. So I'm hoping for an early 2021 vaccine or strong antiviral, and then things start to slowly, I don't think it's going to be a complete and immediate recovery, but slowly get back to normal as we get further into 2021. But
Anybody else?
if the vaccine is delayed or is ineffective, then
Yeah. Back to square one.
Yep.
Yeah, just to add, I agree with Scott. And it's going to be difficult because there's been a lot of companies, a lot of examples in the past of vaccines which have come out and have not worked. So, even if the vaccine comes and they're talking, there's a company in the UK, it's a global company, and they're talking about 300 to 400 million vaccines by the end of the year. And if you look at the world population, that's just kind of a drop in the ocean. Everybody will want to get it. And so, yeah, I think I agree with Scott until that comes and it's effective. And, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but I think it takes a while before you figure out whether this thing's going to work or not. It probably reacts differently. Different populations and ethnic groups probably react differently as well to the medication.
Right. Anybody else? Well, first of all, I'd like to thank each of you for all the hard work you put into doing these presentations. I think these will be of great value to our audience. And for the audience out there, all of the PowerPoints will be made available to you by tomorrow morning. Also, the webinar is being recorded, and we will have a link to a site on YouTube where you can gather it. The Chamber now is making available a website where all of the webinars coming up for any chapter in our Chamber will be available to anybody else. So, if there's a webinar coming up in Los Angeles or Houston or Miami, you will be able to get to it. So that's about it. We're finishing on time. I hope it was very useful to everybody. We enjoyed doing it and bringing it to you. We are working on doing a webinar in the next couple of weeks on the subject of globalization, which should be very interesting. So anyway, thank you all for coming, and we hope to talk to you soon. And again, be well and stay safe. Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Good.
Everyone.
Bye now.